Basically, today we're going to go over like a brief history of Taekwondo. The art of Taekwondo, as a name anyway, came about in April of 1955, 70 years ago. Two historical events that basically shaped what are modern Korean martial arts was the occupation of Korea by Japan in 1909-1910 to 1945, and also the Korean War from the 1950s, 50 to 53. Japan came in 1909 and basically they occupied Korea. You couldn't practice any of Korea's arts that might have existed back then. They made it illegal. They either put you in prison or they put you under the sword. You died. So no one was practicing ancient Korean arts. There really wasn't a whole lot of records of ancient Korean arts. Taekwondo is out there, but the thing about Taekwondo is there's still limited information about it in its entirety. They say it's the old school version of Taekwondo. One looks at the art, there's similarities, but they're not the same thing. In the 1940s, when Korea came out of the occupation, they were still practicing, when Japan allowed them, they were still practicing karate, jiu-jitsu, or a derivative of it. A lot of the art you see today, like say Taekwondo itself, you look at Shotokan karate and you see some very clear similarities there. More so in Tang Sudo, which is basically Korean Shotokan, if we're being honest. Taekwondo wasn't all that different. In 1955, a man by the name of a major general, by the way, of name of Hung Hee-chae, came up with the name Taekwondo, since it was similar to Taekyon. At the time, Korea was still practicing basically karate. A lot of the Kwanjang names from the Muda Kwan, Song Lu Kwan, Chang Lu Kwan, Chung Du Kwan, basically all these different names, these different schools, they were practicing what was basically Shotokan, with some elements of Chinese and surviving elements of what might have been Korean arts at the time. 1960s, that's when the changes really hit. That's when Taekwondo really started to get traction as being the blanket term that it became for Korea's arts. Although some of the instructors, or some of the Kwanjangnims, I should say, weren't on board with this. Hwang Ki from the Muda Kwan, he decided to stick with Tang Sudo. Young In Che, who was the founder of Hapkido, wasn't even involved in that whole thing. At least not in most parts of it. But Taekwondo really started to see the changes, or should I say the formation and the changes, in the 1960s. In 66, that's when General Che left Korea and started his International Taekwondo Federation and had their own forms, the Chunghan, or should I say the Blue Cottage forms, Chunji, Dangun, Dosan, and the like. Fast forward to the 1970s, 72, 73, that's when you had the WTF, the World Taekwondo Federation, under Dr. An Young Kim. Their goal there was to promote the sport of Taekwondo to the rest of the world. Noble goal. But when you saw these two organizations, you saw two different paths. One's a martial art, one's a martial sport. Not all the instructors in these different federations subscribed to that. Some were very much martial artists still. And I myself came from a World Taekwondo Federation affiliated group. It's just that politics are a messed up thing in martial arts. Taekwondo from that point on just it became known as just the kicking art. And there's a lot of kicks in Taekwondo. It's just that if you look at an ITF school and you look at a WT school, you'll see very different mentalities. You'll see sine wave with the ITF, which is basically a method of movement and generation of power for technique, where you have the WTF or WT people who a lot of their goals, or should I say their technique, involves higher stances. You don't have that same explosiveness sometimes. It almost looks robotic in their pumse. Some of the older schools from that still exist from the Kwans, you'll see different things there. They'll stick to what still looks like karate. I myself, being my own school being called classic, I've taken the old style karate style forms and I've taken the international taekwondo, the ITF forms, not using the sine wave, but basically what it comes down to is sticking to the roots of the art, which are an art. There's nothing wrong with the sport, but when you hit a certain age, let's face it, you're not going to be practicing to go to the Olympics. There's some people out there who could. It's just when you hit a certain age, your 40s, 50s, you're probably not thinking about that. But sticking to history, what Taekwondo was and what it became was basically politics. South Korean government wants a sport, so that meant techniques had to be a certain way. That means people don't use hands anymore. In the International Taekwondo Federation, it still looks like a point system where it looks like karate. Historically, there is no way that you're going to call something like the art of Taekwondo a 2,000-year-old product. If you're looking at the concept of unarmed combat, that goes back millennia. But if you're looking at an art like Taekwondo, there's just nothing to connect it to an ancient 2,000-year-old system. I know I'll catch heat for saying that, but you do your research throughout Korea's martial arts. There's a lot of good publications out there. General Che had a collection of books, or a series of books that were the ITF patterns. There's a book by the late Grandmaster Richard Chun, which was an excellent book that talked about Kukiwan style Taekwondo. A little bit dated, but again, a good book. The history of an art is important because if you understand your lineage, you understand a lot of things about what your art is. It's not the art that determines effective, it's the person. But understanding the history is a very important part of that. And each one of these videos, you're going to see something different. If you like what you see, subscribe. Send me a like. More to come.